Patrick, the founder of 21st Century Newswire, geopolitical commentator on Russia Today, and in my opinion, one of the people who we should certainly be paying attention to what he has to say. So, ladies and gentlemen, Patrick Henningsen.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming today. It's great to see some familiar faces, but I'm kind of new to the alternative view. Ian's a great event organizer, and I'm very privileged to be asked to speak at this. I'm going to go through quite a few things that a lot of you, I assume people who come here are familiar with the sort of material that we're going to present. So I'm not preaching to the converted, as it were, but I think it's really important. The theme of this talk is the apocalypse. I used to think that meant Armageddon, but in reality, it means something altogether quite different, which I'm going to show you guys in a minute. 21st Century Wire is my website. I basically started in my spare time out of my bedroom a couple years ago, and I'd done it on the side like a hobby, but it's a bit more than a hobby because I was following the news and I was very active in the anti-war movement a couple of years ago, a little bit disenchanted with how that went, and I felt it was time to put my skills to use. So I worked in public relations on the corporate level, working for technology firms and people like that, and also in event organizing years ago. So I'm familiar with some of these elite names that we're throwing about all the time. But it's really important. I'm going to show you at the end of this presentation how you can, if you're interested, if you want to become a media outlet, how you can do that for very little money. So I'm going to just show that to you at the end because I want to leave it on a positive note. But it's really important. News for the waking generation. I've developed all these strap lines for 21st Century Wire because I think it's important that we create our own language. Okay, for the last 100 years, our culture has been thrust upon us by maybe a very small group of people who sit on socially and financially another level than we do. But in reality, throughout history, culture has always come from the grassroots. It often gets co-opted by commercial interests and elite interests, but in reality, we are the culture, okay? McDonald's is not a culture. That's from the top coming down, raining upon us. The real culture, the real creativity, the real ideas is coming from the grassroots. And so I tried to get a job at a couple of major newspapers, magazines, and they looked at my CV and they just weren't interested for some reason. I thought I had all the skills, but apparently I wasn't qualified. I wasn't the guy they were looking for. And I've even found that in the alternative media, some of the big outlets. I was not the guy they were looking for. So I think the universe was sending you need to really do this on your own. And it's really the only way to do it. And sometimes that is the only way to do it. So more propaganda from 21st Century Wire. Information is power. It is, but it's only a part of the story. You need to be informed. You need to be able to collate information. This is something that was really thrown around since 9/11. Okay, this is a very powerful concept, the concept of the conspiracy theorist, because it is used to silence debate. And as this person says here, this is from the website Change on Earth. Nothing more than a derogatory title used to dismiss a critical thinker. That's a great definition. And that's something you'll be faced with. You know, the biggest barrier to people expressing their opinion on an event is the fear of being ridiculed, especially by friends, family, and work colleagues. Okay? So you need to kind of equip yourself, and people who are of like-minded, open thinkers, critical debaters, not in a closed-off conversation, but an open conversation. You need to arm yourself up with sentences like this and keep them memorized, because this is a meme as well. We have loads of memes going around. Conspiracy theorists, tinfoil hat wearer. Actually, it's a good idea to wear a tinfoil hat, by the way. We'll get into that later. But conspiracy without the theory. That's what I've marketed my show on PSTV with. Because I'm not dealing in theories. I am dealing in hypotheses. There's a big difference. A hypothesis is an educated guess based on history, based on data, based on my analysis and the analysis of my colleagues and people that I follow within the media or the literary world or the academic world. Conspiracy without the theory. So we need to eviscerate these languages, these slogans that the establishment consensus reality gang stalks people with original ideas or people who question the official line. You can have whatever opinion you want about 9/11, 7/7. We'll get into the details of that. Reconfiguring your reality. I had to reconfigure my reality about half a dozen times in the last 12 years, 15 years. The journey is a long journey, and I'm constantly shuffling this reality, the way I see the world. And I think it's a healthy thing that you have a dynamic view of what's going on around you and how you see the world. It's always changing. Mine is always changing anyway. And I'm totally open to adjustment on that front. Apocalypse. This used to mean Armageddon. Language is very important. Here's a perfect example of a perversion of language. That's a Latin word. So in Greek, it means something totally different than what it's being used all the time. I see it every day. The apocalypse, and they're mistaking that with Armageddon. When you misappropriate language, you change reality in a very contorted way. So anything that comes after that is rubbish. It's kind of, intellectual, it's a shambles, basically. Apocalypse. This is what it used to mean before this year for me. It used to mean an event evolving in destruction or damage of an awesome or catastrophic scale. I think that's more close to Armageddon. Okay, this is what apocalypse really means, and when you internalize this, it's like when you fast, you never notice people, when you don't fast, you never notice the whole concept of people eating and stuffing their face in McDonald's. When you fast and you look through the window, it's like watching a movie. You see the burgers going and the fries and people like rushing to eat. So this is the same sort of revelation I had when I learned the Latin meaning of apocalypse. So if you ever see it used in that fashion, the first definition, you need to correct people and say, actually, no, it's this. That is a metaphor. It's something everyone's familiar with, especially because of the Matrix, okay? Now, these days, I've said to people, it's not a case of taking the red or the blue pill. We have to take 2 of each on a daily basis. But let's talk about the red pill. Okay, this is, there's so many different cultures that have spoken of the apocalypse. Okay, the Hopis predicted one thing. The Mayans predicted the end of days. The Maoris said the veils would dissolve and there would be a merging of physical and spiritual worlds. The Zulus believed the whole world would be turned upside down. The Hindus, the coming of Kaliki and critical mass and the enlightened ones. The Incas called it the age of meeting ourselves again. The Aztecs called it the time of the 6th sun. The Dogon tribe in the Kalahari, in Mali, in Africa, said a spaceship would arrive with visitors and the Nomo will return to form a blue star. The Pueblo Indians acknowledge it'll be the emergence into the 5th world. And the Tibetan and the Egyptians made allusions to the Buddha predicting the coming of a golden age, and the Great Pyramid cycle and the calendar, allegedly, according to this source, ends on 2012. I don't know if any of these are what any of these are, because I wasn't alive when they're written. But I'm alive today, and I know I'm going to translate what I think is the lifting of the veils today, and it's a multifaceted analysis. The quickening. A lot of people in ancient texts and modern texts saying that there will be a quickening during the apocalypse. And it only stands to reason if it is a revelation, if a lifting of the veil. And within the quickening, some people say that revelations will happen so fast that many will find it difficult to process everything. How many people could relate with that right now? I definitely will raise my hand. Old paradigms will collapse faster than they can be replaced. Clandestine operators will act out of desperation. Intuition will trump cold calculation. Like-minded people will be able to recognize each other much easier than before. Does any of this ring familiar to anybody sitting here today? Is definitely for myself more than ever. I don't know if it's the age I'm at or if it's this year that we're living in, but it's definitely happening, and I'm not the only one who's experiencing this. Apocalypse, the unveiling. Unveiling of what? Unveiling of secret genocides. Okay, these are the things killing me slowly, as it were. Genetically modified organisms is, for me, the number one concern, and also ELFs, which is microwave activity that we're immersed in right now. False flag terror, 9/11/7/7, Operation Gladio. Gladio is a big one right now because Europe is currently falling back into the paradigm, especially during an economic crisis. We might see a repeat, sort of a repeat of the 70s. Science and technology. Free energy, that was a conspiracy theory 10 years ago. Now I can download free energy solutions and applications. I can build them myself if I want to. Secret societies, Freemasonry. Now, you'd be naive to think that it would just disappear tomorrow. It's not. But the thing people are starting to realize now is, with regards to people who are in positions of influence, the judiciary, the police, politics, do they have a conflict of interest? Does their loyalty within their secret society supersede their public duty? This is a good question. Money and finance. The veil has been lifted on the financial world, and to be exposed is nothing more than a casino that's got 1/10 of the regulations that a casino in Atlantic City has, or Las Vegas. They can get away with things, they can structure gambling transactions that you could never do if you're a professional gambler, okay? That's now been exposed. Pedophiles in power. This has also been told by some as being a conspiracy theory, which I'll get into. This is a big revelation this year, okay? It opened up a can of worms that it's hard for me to tell whether this is a controlled explosion or if it's a genuine explosion. I'm not sure yet. I'm not convinced. But we do know that Sir Jimmy Savile had a lot of friends in a lot of high places. And I don't think the media is doing its job digging into this story and questioning everybody who was very close to Jimmy Savile. Okay, they're not doing that. Certainly the government is not interested, genuinely interested in this subject. And you can work out for yourself why. Number 10, panic. Now, this obviously, the whole concept of this kind of activity in high places is going to cause a panic because it has the potential of destabilizing the power structure in this country. And that's not a good thing if you're within the power structure and you depend on that power structure to maintain your status, your financial status, your career. And it's up to us really to keep asking questions and not to let sleeping dogs lie, because there's a lot more skeletons in the basement, as it were, than we're being told. Now the gatekeepers have rushed in to do damage control. There's one. I don't know if this guy's familiar to anybody. He used to write for The Observer, he writes for The Times. This is what he says about child abuse victims. His name's David Aronovich. He said, "The unattractive, because complicating truth, is that sometimes people do lie about being abused. Sometimes it's for money, sometimes for attention, sometimes because that's what they infer their listeners want to hear, or fantasy becomes solidified as fact. The dream is daylight." He's talking about Steve Mesham, North Wales boys' home scandal. He's talking about Steve Mesham. And I thought, this is a little bit interesting that all these points would come out in his article last month, all at once. The name of the article was "Beware of a Modern Salem Over Child Abuse." It's ironic that the Salem witch trials were about powerful men trying to cover up their crimes. Historically, that is what the Salem witch trials were about. It wasn't about catching witches. Pedophiles in positions of power, according to this top national columnist, is a conspiracy theory. Okay? And some allegations against Jimmy Savile might not be true. This sounds to me like a gatekeeper operation. And there's many of these people in the media who are basically sprung into action to do damage control. And I thought, I remember this guy. I'm trying to think, where do I know him from? Where do I know David Aronovich from? 2003. He was part of the pro-war left. Nick Cohen, David Aronovich, a bunch of other top writers formed this PR kind of phenomenon called the pro-war left. But it was a total disingenuous creation designed to divide anti-war sentiment in this country. And they did a very effective job of it. So there he is with Christopher Hitchens, like two peas in a pod, these guys. And David Aronovich, after the war, 2003, April, after the invasion, those weapons had better be there. So he was really protecting the dodgy dossier and really beating the drum for war, weapons of mass destruction, all these things that we know are fiction now. These are some of the people that pushed it through at the time to make sure that there was some sort of public consensus. So the government had some, even a flimsy mandate. They had something. And so it's a conspiracy theory, pedophiles in positions of power. And here we go a couple of weeks ago. Well, this is one of them, Sir Cyril Smith. And unfortunately, the police lost the dossier on Sir Cyril Smith. And that's why these people never get arrested. Jimmy Savile, lost. Reports lost. North Wales boys' home scandal, photographs. Ooh, we think we misplaced them. In this case, it was seized by the MI5. Okay, this has come out after the fact. So why isn't justice happening on the day? That's the question you need to be asking. And what role do all these institutions play in this, making this type of an outcome, which isn't a great outcome? It's good for the establishment, but it's not really good in terms of the public interest and justice, or the victims, who we often forget to even mention in these scenarios. Now, this is an interesting thing that's played out in the last couple of months. You've got Philip Schofield up there with a puppet. You've got the Twitter bird. It's Lord McAlpine, BBC. So this is McLibel 2.0. This has turned into an absolute circus. And nothing has really come out of this yet, other than there's been some fairly large payouts from BBC and ITV for Lord McAlpine. But unfortunately, I've asked every single person I know, have you seen McAlpine's name on Philip Schofield's show? Everyone says that he showed this list, and I couldn't read it. I looked online. I did a Philip Schofield search, a 3-minute search. I couldn't find anything of who was on this list. And the BBC, I don't remember them mentioning Lord McAlpine's name. So how was his name leaked? Was it the police? Was it the BBC? Who was it? This smells to me of a staged event. And I think the outcome, looking at the outcome, it's quite clear that this was, to some degree, a staged event. I can't prove whether it was how it was done, but it doesn't look right, doesn't smell right. And I think that's a conversation that has been buried, basically. And it's actually squashed the Jimmy Savile revelations as well. Very, very effective. Now, how can you pull off something this slick? Well, you need to be a man of means. And this is a book called The New Machiavelli, written in 2000, I believe, or 2003. And it's about public relations and how to skew public opinion. And it's written by Lord McAlpine. And he says, a book on how to manipulate people for the greater good. What is the greater good? Or how to manipulate people for the great and the good. And he says, my advice on dealing with the media: spread false defeat to gain public sympathy, or false accusation and then arrange it for it to be exposed as such, so the accuser will forever be treated with suspicion. That's a quote from Lord McAlpine 12 years ago. When I saw that, I was blown away. I discovered this on John Ward's blog. John Ward is one of the best bloggers I've seen on this subject, bar none. And he pulled this out first, and we republished it. This is interesting, because isn't this exactly what we're seeing today? And will they use this in relation to the Leveson inquiry? Yes. Do they want to censor the internet? Yes. Will they censor the internet? They might, but it depends on how active all of us are to see through this scam and call it for what it is. We have courts, we have justice system, they're all equipped to deal with things like libel. But what we're having here is people who have the means to use back channels, and people who have the means to, instead of facing it in a court of law, to push government policy around it and drop it right on top of your heads. That's what's going on right now today with the Leveson inquiry, and more petals will unfold from that story. Radio 4, Steve Mesham spring to mind when I heard this quote. It's pretty spooky. Now, what do all three of these guys have in common? Well, we're not accusing them of doing anything other than having illustrious careers in politics and being fantastic at their jobs running around Westminster. But all three of these people, it's a fact, this is not a theory, were all mentioned in this issue of Scallywag magazine, 1999. And none of these three sued Scallywag at the time. Read into that what you will, but that's a fact. We're not making this up. You can read that online. You just do a Google search, Scallywag. The gods of money. We'll put the dirty business of the last subject away for a second on the shelf. This is one of the things that has been lifted. The veil's been lifted off the gods of money. 10 years ago, you go to a WTO protest. Nobody knows what the Federal Reserve was. Nobody can tell you what fractional reserve banking was. Now, even I go to an Occupy event, and everybody knows about fractional reserve lending, and they know about the Federal Reserve central banking. They realize that the people who print the money do not really care about what laws are passed or what not, because they are actually impervious to society. So, did you ever see that movie Tropic Thunder? Did anybody see that with Nick Nolte, Robert Downey Jr.? Very funny film. And they had this saying in there, it says, never go full retard. Okay, that's Robert Downey Jr. playing a black soldier Well, it seems that the EU has gone full retard with regards to their monetary policy. And a lot of people have picked up on it very quickly. When they drew out the plans for the EU 30, 40 years ago, it's doubtful that they calculated the rise of the internet. So the amount of people that have copped on to this scam, I don't think they calculated that when they're sitting around the Bilderberg table in 1962 and 63. So we now can look at this, and this is full retard. Look at the situation in Greece, all through Southern Europe. It's ridiculous, okay? So this is Angela Merkel celebrating. Do you remember this? You probably don't, because there's been so many celebrations about debt restructuring deals in the last year with the EU. This was one of the parties they had in June or May, I believe. They said, oh, we've done it. We've solved the Greek crisis. And then a week later, another emergency meeting, and then they come out again. We've done it. We've come to a deal. Well, as you know, nothing has really happened in Southern Europe. And the reason, one of the big reasons is because this game, this is the ultimate craps game. It's the mortgage, the subprime mortgage game, the derivatives game. There's lots of different games, okay? It's ridiculous. I mean, if I had access to borrowing money at negative 1% interest and being able to leverage it up 100 to 1, I'd probably be very wealthy right now. But I don't work in the city. I don't own an investment bank or a hedge fund. I can't do that. In fact, if any of us do it, we'd probably get dragged into court and taken into jail for fraud charges. But if you work in the financial district, it's not a problem. Greece had a choice, crossroads. They could have dumped the euro, gone to a drachma. But the pressure was on the government, and the people hadn't quite copped on to what was going on. If this situation happened right now, this year, today, this week, this might have been a different outcome. But it happened before last year. EU, these are some of the new strap slogans we've come up with. Guaranteed to make you work harder if you are lucky enough to get a job. There's an article that came out, the EU spent, I think it was a couple £100,000 commissioning a study on the nutritional value of worms. So if you look at the economic situation in Southern Europe and Spain, 1 out of 4 people are unemployed, or more than that, I believe it's 30% unemployment between the age of 18 and 30. So wait a minute. We've got austerity problems, we've got budget problems, but they can afford to spend hundreds of thousands of pounds to commission someone to come up with this scenario. And this is the tip of the iceberg. It's waste upon waste upon waste. This is another veil that's been lifted. We've been under the illusion that a university education is worth loads and loads of money. Now in America, it's been expensive for a very long time. Europe's just getting it now with the tuition rises. But in America, it's not uncommon to have people walking around New York City carrying $100,000, $120,000 debt after they graduate. My sister's 47. She's still writing that check out every month for her degree. She had a great degree and she's had a great career, but is it right that she's still paying off the interest on that loan 25 years graduated? She deserves better than that, I believe, and I believe everybody deserves better than that. And the sad fact of the matter is, this is the London student protests. And there's not going to be a lot of jobs available for everybody in these degrees that they've been selling these kids. They're selling the degrees to the kids. They're selling them the prospect of £40,000 a year if you have this degree or that degree. The reality is, some of those jobs are there, but most of those jobs only exist in certain sectors. Many, many, many jobs have been offshored, and many have been lost in this economic crisis. Why are any of these students, instead of charging Parliament, who lobbied for the tuition rises? Who do you think is the beneficiary of quadruple tuitions in this country? The people who give out and sell student loans. Lloyd's TSB, they're just one. You can go online and get student loans for 12 different banks, organizations. It's a bit like the mafia. So you've got the head, horse's head in the bed. When the student's going to wise up, they're too young to know. We should be able to tell the students, you are marching on the wrong building. That the reason you have high tuition is because someone needed to make more money, or the banks who are selling the loans. That's fairly straightforward. The joys of collectivism. This is where Europe is heading. This is where part of Europe was before, is not now, but maybe heading back to. There is all the difference in the world between people treating people equally and attempting to make them equal. There's a fine line there in the language. You should know the difference. They're trying to put all of us on the same level. And that's not a very exciting society to live in. Just ask anybody who lived in Eastern Europe during the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. It's not that great. Now, this is people say, that's a bit extreme. How can you put a swastika with the EU flag? Well, the fact of the matter is, the early architects of the European Union were people who sat on this group right after the Second World War. And many of those people used to have a different boss before the end of the war. That's Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, founder of Bilderberg. Now, modern mythologies. This is a veil that's been lifted. A lot of people took global warming seriously when it became a major talking point in 2003, 4, 5, 6. And Al Gore's movie came out and everyone was crying, tears, and you have amazing amount of activity swirling around the concept of climate change. Human beings have had a thirst for mythology for centuries. This is nothing new. Certain parts of society or certain types of individuals, we need mythology. I needed mythology growing up. I loved that film Star Wars. I loved the whole concept behind it. I loved Yoda, the Jedis fighting Darth Vader. That was a kind of a mythology. And really Star Wars was based largely on the works of Joseph Campbell. And it was a very, very good thing for me as a child. But as I grew up, I realized that I'm not living in Star Wars. I'm living in the real world. So I have to start interpreting my world instead of living in that fantasy world. But a lot of us still have had the problem of requiring these mythologies. Let's run through a couple of these real quick. These are actual threats to humanity. Like the Victorian ring in the Victorian days. They put the poison ring on it. Fluoride. Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Depleted uranium. Big Pharma. GMO. Monsanto. Microwaves, ELFs. Changing our DNA structure. These are real threats to humanity. So how would be the best way to spend $500 billion in the last 5 years, and for all the active, middle-class, university-educated people to get out on the street in order to fight climate change? This isn't a threat to humanity. The climate has always changed. The sun is the #1 driver of climate on this planet. Just ask any dinosaur. But this is where people are going with their energy. They've been taken on this bandwagon, and it's managed to basically keep the spotlight off of those things I just listed before, which are irrevocably damaging the human physical structure, possibly could affect fertility, you name it, in the future. This is serious stuff. That's not serious. Okay, this is just an excuse to go out and be with your friends and feel like you're doing something, but it's not really challenging a major threat. There's Prince Bernhard, and who's really behind the climate change movement? Besides the Club of Rome, WWF. He founded WWF. So you see these links constantly between these top people. Nobel Peace Prize. Amazing. I could do a whole 3-hour session on this gentleman on the right, and I don't know, I almost wish that he would have been president, because if he was president in 2000, he would have been too busy to be doing all this. How best to capitalize on a market? Well, create the market. And these two gentlemen have profited massively off this market that they've created. Al Gore founded the Chicago Climate Exchange, and price per carbon per ton was, I don't know, it opened at $1 something. By the time the thing went out of business in 2010, it was 1 penny per ton of carbon, or negative 1 penny or something like that. The bottom fell out of the market. He luckily cashed out 2 years before and made him and his partners $600 million. And there's another problem. The average global temperature in the last decade is in decline. And this was also proven with the ClimateGate scandal. So there's an incredibly upset polar bear here. And this is Al Gore wondering what's going on. Man-made global warming is a fraud. I would love to see people wearing these t-shirts around skate parks and shopping malls, and not the other ones. At the end of the day, the whole climate change, the carbon market, it's not dead. We've discredited the science, we've discredited the theory. They've just run through with policy. This is what happens. They ram it through. They don't care that you've already shown them to be frauds, because if you allow them to do it, they will do it. They don't care what you think. It's about power over you. That's a pensioner trying to keep their hands warm in the winter. Gas is really important in the Northern Hemisphere. So if you can control the cost of power, you can really engineer society in many, many ways. This is what it's about. Here's another one, overpopulation. I can't tell you how many times I've been speaking to elite people or successful millionaires. One person in particular worked for Microsoft. I was talking to him about the Iraq War at the time. He said, there's just too many people. Sometimes this has to happen. This is something you hear constantly. This is a complete lie. Overpopulation. Guess why North America and Europe, the birth-death ratio in decline. It's a negative birth rate. Not in the developing world. Why is that? Why do we have a negative birth rate? Well, we have a very high level of education, sanitization. We have a thriving middle class. That's why. So what if we gave these things to Africa, to Asia, to South America? They would have a declining birth rate. That's a fact. We don't have to be a collectivist society to achieve that, as has been proven in other countries. So this is a myth. That's a mythology. It's the same thing as Hades has angered Zeus because of something, and so Zeus is going to punish the people on the earth. The war on terror. This is pure mythology. Pure mythology. Pure fiction. I often look at this photo and I see this plane and it doesn't look real. That's another conversation, another 9-hour talk. 19 hijackers. A lot of people bought this at the time. 7 of them are still alive. And they were quickly rounded up, most of those. 19 hijackers, box cutters. Yeah, I don't think so. It's really about making this guy the avatar of this modern mythology. And it's an emotional event, and people are traumatized, and they thrust his face out there. And when you're traumatized, you can absorb a lot of things that you wouldn't normally absorb. Your critical thinking barrier goes down. A lot of people's did in 9/11. Mine went about halfway down. and I almost believe this. Here's another mythology. Islamic extremists running around in Britain plotting to bomb things. Has anybody seen this photo before? This is on the front page of every major newspaper at the time. How blatant they're showing you what they're doing here. Does anybody see anything funny about this photo? Yeah, there's a little bar going, well, one goes behind them and one goes in front. So whoever had the Photoshop assignment wasn't really up to the job. The sad part about 7/7 is this. Some people died in 7/7. That's a tragedy. But there hasn't been any justice for these people who died, because I am not alone in this summation. There's so many holes in the official story. There was no official story on 7/7, actually. There was no investigation. There was no forensic investigation. So they'll never be seen in light of day in a court of law. But people died. They deserve justice. Now, the war on terror has other villains. Here's one that was set up as early as the Lockerbie bombing in 1980. And there he is as a reformed terrorist with his best friend, Nicolas Sarkozy. That was in 2009, I believe. And here was last year. Another mythology. The problem is once you believe the first domino of that mythological line, you'll believe anything after that. And the talking point that allowed a no-fly zone in Libya was that Gaddafi was using the Air Force to shoot protesters. Well, there was never any evidence to that, but the media ran with it anyway. There should have been a Leveson inquiry after that, but there wasn't. And so this guy is celebrating that or he's not, maybe, I don't know what he's doing, but basically that's the result of the no-fly zone and the NATO destruction of Libya, that Western-backed and controlled al-Qaeda forces took large sections of the country under their control. Okay, that's not a conspiracy theory, that's a fact. Now, how they were able to do this in Libya was they had to find divisions within the Libyan society first. And Libya had a history of blacks from sub-Saharan Africa coming and settling and working in certain jobs in Libya. So there was automatically some racism there. So the British and the Americans quickly identified who within Gaddafi's inner circle could be turned and made to exploit this issue. And they did this very successfully. And one of those people is now the number 3 person in charge of the new government, who defected from Gaddafi over this issue in the early days. This is what happened to African people, sub-Saharan African black people in Libya as a result of our country's NATO destruction of that country. Okay? And I have to say, even the American president, who himself is half African or whatever, really came out and said, we're doing this for the freedom of the Libyan people and so forth, but that's rubbish. This is something that has been lifted recently. BICOM, British Israeli Communications Research Center. They brief all the mainstream media about how the talking points, anything related to the Middle East or Israel, is going to go. BICOM. And so they have an incredible influence somehow over all the major daily newspapers and television stations, broadcasters. It's very strange, but they have the exact same thing. States. It's called IPAC, which we'll show you in a minute. Gaza absolutely got hammered a couple weeks ago, very sad. If you've ever seen a refugee camp up close, it's not a pretty sight. And this is the IDF. The standard of living on both sides of that wall in between Palestine is massive. So they're celebrating Hanukkah right now. And here's the soldiers. That's a standard checkpoint. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the situation in Palestine. It's a giant, it's the world's largest open prison, the West Bank and Gaza, essentially is what it is. And that's not a comment against Jews. That's a comment against the state of Israel and its apartheid policies. That's all it is. And I don't think this is really anything that we should have in the 21st century. This is 20th century stuff. Okay, it happened in the 20th century. This is 21st century. We need to move ahead. But we have problems with getting the consensus of public opinion to say, this is a problem. This is a problem. But we have our own problems at home. And I think they're actually more important for us right now than what's happening there. That's IPAC. Benjamin Netanyahu said 9/11 was good for us. Of course it was good for them. This guy ran for president on the Republican ticket this past election. He had no chance of being elected. Why on earth would somebody run and spend all that money? Because the US election is a very staged kind of circus. So you need to put all the different performers out there on stage in order to keep other performers from actually finishing the show. And that's exactly what happened with this guy. All the opinion polls had him in the lead. He had the best grassroots organized movement in America. And for some reason, he was crowded out of the coverage and also the electorate. So Israel does have an impact on US politics in a massive way. Here's another mythology that came out recently. The next bin Laden, Joseph Kony, Kony 2012. And they wanted to catch Kony. They got kids all around America to raise money, empty their piggy banks to catch Kony. Well, Joseph Kony hadn't been spotted in 6 years. A slight problem there. And a great video, though, that they made. And they accused him of child soldiers, recruiting child soldiers. Terrible war crime. These are child soldiers from Uganda. The only thing about this photo is these are child soldiers of the current president, Museveni. There he is with Obama. He declared himself president for life pretty much in 1980, 84, 85. He's still president, by the way. And then still, Kony 2012 basically got people on Facebook and all over the world to say, oh, we need to put troops in Africa. And this plays right into the agenda of Washington, AFRICOM. This is Jason Russell. So really, this is all kind of a fraud. Millions collected, massive fraud, all based on a lie. That's a crime scene in my book. But because it was done as a charity, I don't know what justice is going to be done there. And what happens when you basically go out, put yourself out as a world saver, save the world, save the children of Africa, all based on lies. The universe, this was what we call poetic justice. This is what happened to Jason Russell after Kony 2012 was exposed. He was found running naked through the streets of San Diego, shouting in the middle of traffic, really sad, sectioned probably, or on heavy medication. He's just come out and made a statement saying he was stressed out. I know he was stressed out because he realized that he'd been used for this massive fraud. That is poetic justice. Mythology. Now, Bashar al-Assad, Ahmadinejad, if you've seen any of their interviews in the last few years, these guys strike me as pretty canny, pretty intelligent, definitely not stupid, and they don't sound like your average tin pot dictator. Especially Assad's interview with Shevardnadze on Russia Today about 3 or 4 weeks ago. It was incredible. I thought, God, I wish we had a prime minister who could speak that eloquently in English. Friends of Syria. This woman in the middle is a friend of Syria, but with friends like that, who needs enemies? And that's Syrian Danny. Do you remember this guy, Danny Dayam? He was CNN's poster boy for the Free Syrian Army last year. He was kind of exposed as a British operative. So that was part of the PSYOP, to keep the story of Syria rolling ahead. This is the plan for Syria. It's very close to the old French mandate, pre-World War II, to divide Syria up into little pockets, divide and rule, easy to manage. attack Iran? Everybody says no. Everybody says no. That's why it was not raised very much in the U.S. debates before the election started between Obama and Romney, because opinion polls said this is a no-go. Of course, the election results came in, and now it's full steam ahead on Iran. You see how the public was duped temporarily because of the election. Press TV has been taken off the air in this country and also Eurosat. The reason is, it's not because of sanctions. It's because when they attack Iran, the last thing they want is satellite broadcasts coming in about dead civilians, schools being bombed, children being murdered as a result of this unilateral strike against these weapons of mass destruction. Sound familiar? That's what you can expect. This was Iraq. This is from one of those American troop videos on YouTube where they're playing this patriotic music and they're dropping smart bombs down on anybody, really, I think. And that's what we got with the Iraq War. Does everybody remember this? It was one of the lowest points of humanity in modern times. And it was not just this. I saw it in Afghanistan over and over and over. Makes you think that there's something wrong with this picture. There's something extremely wrong with our society that we can produce this. And this is almost on a more disgusting level than some of the things I've seen in World War II. She's very instrumental. Who would challenge an African-American woman in a position of power? It's progress, right? Well, Condoleezza Rice is just another person doing their job to ram through what they're supposed to ram through for their bosses, and she will be replaced, or she was replaced by Hillary Clinton, who will be replaced by Susan Rice, who is arguably more cold and calculating than this Rice, if you look at her bio. Okay, these are the guys. These are our mythology demons. This is Hades and all our evil characters all lined up. All to get this in place. This is Home Office, JTAC, threat levels, UK. This is what it's all about. This didn't exist before 9/11 or 7/7. It's ridiculous if you think about it, and if you hear it when you're going through the airports. I was going through an airport in Phoenix, Arizona in March, and I always opt out of the body scanners from the day one. I've never actually walked through one. I always opt out. And while I was opting out, they sent me back to the special area, and I was waiting to be searched. And I see a guy sitting next to me who's missing 2 arms and 2 legs, and I see a TSA officer swabbing his wooden limbs for explosives. And this guy's probably about 55, 58. And I looked at him, I said, this has got to be a joke. It's got to be one of those Jackass films. And I said, are they serious? And he says, yes. He's, they do this to me every time. His name is Jeff Lewis, and we became good friends after that. I wrote a story and put this out that this was happening. I mean, this guy is a motivational speaker, travels all around the world giving motivational speeches because after he lost his arms and legs, he was back to work in 8 weeks as a math teacher. This is an extraordinary individual. But he doesn't get a security waiver. There's Jeff running a marathon. There's Beyonce. She has a security waiver. So does Puff Daddy and all these celebrities and super politics and bureaucrats, VVIPs. Who would you rather meet and have dinner with between these two? To me, Jeff Lewis is the celebrity, not her. He should have the security waiver, not her. But that is the epitome of the hypocrisy of the society that we're looking at right now in 2012, and we can all see it. I decided to revise the Homeland Security system, and a shame about Elmo, but he's actually back on top again. Those accusations were unfounded. That's what we've been reduced to. This is the level that they have reduced the majority society to, is this level of characterization with bin Laden and Gaddafi and Assad and Ahmadinejad, all lies and caricatures. It's just cartoons. That's what they have reduced society to. We can't let that happen to the adult population, because it's going to be a lot tougher for the next generation if we're residing on that level of mentality. Hollywood has its own agenda. I saw this film. I was hoping it was going to be good. Luckily, I only rented the DVD. I didn't pay for the full cinema release. It was the biggest piece of propaganda I've ever seen in my life. The whole film was really designed to make Arabs look stupid and backwards, and to basically say, at least on 3 or 4 occasions, ramming home this talking point during his film, that all the Arab countries want to make nuclear weapons so they can destroy Israel. Well, is there any truth to that? I don't think so. There is no truth to that. He is a Hollywood player. So I would think this guy was more intelligent than to be doing that sort of job. But he is. And this is one example of many. How many films have you seen that are just out and outright policy propaganda coming out of Hollywood? You really need to look at some of these films very closely. It's a new hobby, is reading the propaganda lines in films. This one was, I can't even say. There was a nice scene at the end where he gave a speech about America being a dictatorship, which I thought was quite clever. The only problem was it was only about a minute. The film was 2 hours. The Messiah mythology. Everybody was waiting for a Messiah before 2008. And the reason they needed that guy in the White House was to ram home this agenda. The Middle East has been secured. Africa's next. That's what was happening in Libya. So you have, ironically, an African-American president who's sanctioning the ethnic cleansing of black Africans in Libya. That's a fact. A lot of Occupy people in America are also, and in Europe, are Obama supporters. Okay? It's just a natural synergy that if I'm an Occupy person, I should be supporting Obama or be a liberal or a Democrat or some side of this fake paradigm. And a lot of people in the Occupy movement think that this is the solution. Those bankers are making billions. They need to implement a Robin Hood tax. That'll fix everything, and all that money has to be guaranteed to go to free housing and poor people and help the third world. And so if I had a room full of Occupy people, I said, how many of you trust that this government is spending your taxes in the right way? No one will raise their hand. But if I say, how many people are in favor of a Robin Hood tax? Everyone's going to raise their hand. That somehow, in this mythology of Robin Hood, it's a myth that all the money will be spent appropriately. So really, I think that Occupy should be challenging the current spending budgets and not thinking about a Robin Hood tax, which I guarantee you that's going to be a huge slush fund. It's going to make a lot of people very rich. Another scam. That was before Bin Laden, the raid on Bin Laden. That's the Situation Room. That is the level that they have brought society down to. There's Obama, and this is the reality. Homeless in America, everywhere. Okay, it's not that bad that you can see it in every city, but definitely in some cities, it's worse than others, and it's very visible. The land of opportunity, presidents playing golf, just like Bush. Always on the golf course, always on holiday. Dumpster diving, this is an art form. There's even a couple of shows out in America on this, how to find food out of bins. That's what they're conditioning us towards. Divide and rule is the order of the day. They want to get you at each other's throats, left or right, men versus women, liberal, conservative. They want you to identify with one of those. They want you to think there's a clash of civilizations in the Middle East. It's East versus West. We don't have to fight each other by being on one side of these fake paradigms, okay? And likewise, it's really important that people in the alternative media are not spending all their energy fighting each other. And it's very easy to get baited into that. And I've been a victim of that myself on a very small level, but it's really important that everyone keeps their eye on the prize, which is justice, freedom, progressing humanity. Timeshares. This woman's trying to sell you something that you don't need. You don't have to buy it. People would buy a timeshare right now. Anybody? Okay. If this was a timeshare motivational conference 10 years ago, a lot of hands would be up and we'd be singing and having a group hug. But we all know about timeshares now. There's no difference than this. There's no difference. Someone's trying to sell you something. They're trying to sell you that that's a terrorist, that's a rebel, that's a freedom fighter. Okay, they're selling a version of reality or history or law. However, you don't have to buy it. Only if you buy that, what they're selling, is it worth anything? Every sales pitch needs a buyer, and I'm not going to buy something that I think is rubbish, like a timeshare. And they use these trusted sources. Wolf Blitzer. There's a nice group of people here. I spent a lot of time on Photoshop designing this. It's kind of a sick, kind of guilty pleasure. I don't trust any of these guys. They're the super class, super bureaucratic class. Some of them are genuine elites. You don't want to be a muck. And if you're buying that level of stuff on a day-to-day basis, you are a mug. And I do not want to be a mug. Stop doing that and tell your friends, stop doing that. Buy one of these mugs. I'm not selling these, by the way. Humanity's true nature. This is what I found out through traveling around the world, that we're not fighting against each other. War is not a universal maxim. That people's real nature is that of community, is that of helping each other, of sensitivity, of family, okay? Not a minority of psychopaths who are running government and entertainment and media. Compassion. Bob Marley, good quote. The greatness of man is not how much wealth he acquires, but his integrity, his ability to affect those around him positively. If we all did a little bit of that each day, the job would be very light. Don't let them censor the internet. They want to, and they will go for it. And they'll go for it sooner than we think. It's not something that's going to come in 10 years. It's going to come very quickly. And it's going to be a challenge, and we have to stand up, and we have to fight for freedom of expression, freedom of speech. If there's a problem between parties, we have a law system, we have a justice system, we can settle that in. But censorship, that's bringing us back. That's regression. You are the media. This is what I want to leave everybody with. You are the media. You can create your own media outlet. Okay, the mainstream media is narrow. The web is egalitarian. Some of the best websites have the best material on it. It's no coincidence. Content rules. This guy, Morris 108, I stumbled across. I love this guy. Not a great filmmaker, but his content is amazing. He rides around his moped and films people and does Skype interviews, and he's got the best intel on Syria, Libya, and he's doing it out of his bedroom. That, to me, is the media. Tony Robbins, motivational speaker. I'm going to save you 2,000 pounds. Basically, just do what you love what you do, become good and effective at it, and stick with it. That's basically the whole premise of his, after you spend 10,000 with him, that's what you end up with. And don't worry about what people think. That's massive. And the cost of that is 0.00. So again, remember, this is the apocalypse. Red pill or blue pill. We're going to swallow the red pill today, at least I am. It's up to you which one you want to swallow. You can have both. And really, you know this guy. The whole point is, what's the difference between us humans and the animal kingdom? Well, we have something which is called a conscious choice, okay? We have conscious choice. We are conscious beings. We can choose whether to go right or left. We are not pre-programmed. At least we shouldn't be. So this is a show, the slide's a bit cut off, but it's Conspiracy Without the Theory. We're on PSTV channel 191 on Thursdays at 6. There's new shows coming out, and Russia Today. And thank you very much. If you guys have any questions later in the thing or afterwards, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you very much.
Outstanding.